Anthony Davis from Duquesne University, Associate Professor of Economics, is with us on the program. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You and your colleague writing at The Blaze, Michael Bloomberg, shoots 50 million blanks on gun control. All right. So what makes you say that Bloomberg is shooting blanks with his effort to take on the NRA?
Well, the conventional wisdom that Bloomberg and company hold is that if you reduce the number of guns out there, you'll reduce gun crime, which sounds right on the face of it until you realize that when you reduce the number of guns out there, you're doing two things. One is you're reducing the number of guns in the hands of bad guys who will use them offensively. But then you're also decreasing the number of guns in the hands of good guys who will use them defensively. So really, the question is, if you're looking to reduce the amount of gun violence, you need to know which of these two effects is greater. And what we've done is, we went back and looked at data for the United States. Go back 20 years. Over the past 20 years, the number of households in the U.S. that report having access to a gun has been about constant. It's not 45%, but the firearm violence rate has cut by half. Now, that kind of data, if it's true that getting guns out of the hands of people would reduce the amount of firearm violence, we should not be seeing the data that we're actually seeing.
No, you're right. In fact, I mean, it seems like that should be a fairly steady number as well. Then, right? The number of homicides.
Should be, yeah.
It shouldn't be dropping to
exactly.
40-year lows.
That's right. If Bloomberg is correct, then we should have seen firearm violence holding constant for the past 20 years, not cutting by 50%.
Okay, but as you say, you can break it down even further because violent crime has not been dropping at a steady level throughout every portion of the country. So you can look at, and what you looked at were states with above average and below average rates of gun ownership.
That's right, and this is where this whole business about states being experiments in democracy is just beautiful. We've got 50 experiments out there, different states dealing with gun ownership in different ways. So let's compare them. If you divide the states into two parts, the 50% of the states that have more liberal gun control laws and those that have more restrictive gun control laws, what you find is the states with higher gun ownership have the same murder rate, the same rate for forcible rape, the same aggravated assault. And that flies in the face of what Bloomberg and company are telling us, which is you've got to get guns off the street to reduce the crime. Comparing the states with more guns don't have more crime. In fact, interestingly, when it comes to the robbery rate, states with significantly more guns have significantly fewer robberies.
Okay, so the homicide rate, as you say, not huge changes, but what does change is the ability to defend themselves against those would-be robbers.
That's right. And that's kind of what you would expect because murder tends to be more a crime of passion than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether you have if you're going to commit it, it doesn't matter what type of weapon you're going to use. You're going to use whatever's at hand. So you would expect, as we see in the data, that there's no difference in the murder rate between states that have a lot of guns versus states that have few guns.
Uh-huh. Okay, now you also say that the Institute of Medicine and National Research Council did research after the Sandy Hook murders to, quote, research the causes and prevention of gun violence. You say that they completed this project, and the White House didn't really want to talk about it because the results were not particularly helpful to the gun control crowd.
Yeah, this is very interesting because this study was conducted at the request of President Obama. And the study found exactly the opposite of what the president was hoping it would find, which is that, actually the number of mass shootings in the United States has been declining over time. It's not been rising. We do not have an epidemic of violence. The reason we think that we have an epidemic of violence is because that's what makes the news. So when one incident like this happens, it's thrown all over the news for the next 2 weeks, and you have interviews with everybody who's involved, and it creates this impression that this is a common thing. And in fact, it isn't. The number of mass shootings and victims of mass shootings has been declining steadily over the past 20 years.
And it's interesting because we've talked about the lack of media coverage about this drop in crime on the program a number of times, Professor, and yet it took, as John Ekdahl from Ace of Spades pointed out, it took Wayne LaPierre talking to the interannual meeting for the national media to say, "Oh, Wayne LaPierre's crazy talking about these carjackers and rapists and murderers that are out there." Why? Violent crime is dropping in this country and has been for years.
Yeah, this is right. And you have to remember, the media is out there to sell papers, to sell eyeballs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that's out of the ordinary, that's controversial, that's what they're going to put up there. News that violence is declining is not exciting, so that's not what you're going to hear on the evening news.
No, sadly, but it is what is taking place in real life. And again, that drop in violent crime is occurring as gun ownership in this country has either remained steady or the number of guns owned in this country has gone up now, right? I mean, privately owned firearms.
That's correct.
Yeah?
Yeah, the number of guns that Americans own has gone up steadily. Now, the data we looked at, we compared the violence rate to the number of households that have access to a gun. And so it's a more conservative estimate, because what I'm simply asking is, can you get your hands on a gun, yes or no? It doesn't matter how many guns you have. But if you actually count up the number of guns has been rising steadily over the past 20 years, while the firearm violence rate has been falling steadily.
There you go. Professor, I'm curious, what has been the reaction to this story and the research that you've presented here?
Well, it's funny, because there's two types of reactions I get. One type is thank you very much for saying this. I've thought this all along, and it's nice that someone's actually putting the numbers out there. And the other type of reaction is an emotional reaction of, you just want to see more people die. Well, clearly that's not the case. It's not the case on either side. Everybody wants to see less firearm violence. The question is, do you care more about reducing firearm violence than you do about pushing whatever your pet political project is? And if you care more about reducing firearm violence, the answer to that, if you look at the data, is to let people buy guns legally if they want to. Let them carry them legally if they want to.
All right, Professor.
When you put restrictions, all you do is take them out of the hands of the good guys.
Professor, listen, I really appreciate you coming on the program. Would love to have you back again, and thank you for your research, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.